Hello, and we're live. Hello. Thank you very much for joining me today. Our second Janome HQ live Instagram. My name is Michael Smith, National Consumer Education Manager of Janome Canada. So thank you very much for joining me in my sewing room today as we continue our look at A to Z with Janome. So I will be joining you every afternoon, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 2 p.m. to go through the Janome alphabet, as it were, showing you a lot of the presser feet and attachments and accessories that go with various machines in order to make your jobs easier. So on Monday, I debuted this series with A, our cute little applique foot, and the little sample I made with it. The applique foot's an additional foot that you can purchase from your Janome Dealer. So today, Janome HQ Instagram Live is brought to you by the letter B, and that is for buttons and buttonholes. Now, you can sew both buttons and buttonholes with any Janome machine. I'll show you some of the presser feet that will make the job easier for you. You can do it faster and easier in less time than it'll take you to thread up a needle. So again, any of our Janome machines will sew a buttonhole. A basic buttonhole on the mechanical machines, for example, are the ones with like the knobs on the front, and they might do a 4-step buttonhole. So it'll sew down one side, it'll go across to do that bar tack as step number 2, step number 3 will go down the other side, and step number 4, it'll go across the bottom. So again, regular 4-step buttonhole, very beautiful, very simple. Now, as you go up the Janome line, as the machines get a little more sophisticated, you get into some of the computer technology and more stitches. So we'll have some decorative buttonholes, and this one down here is like one of the keyhole buttonholes, for example, is really good for thicker fabric. Or the stretch buttonhole, for example, I'll show you that of where that's beneficial to use with your knit and stretchy fabrics. We can also do big buttonholes too, which again, a special foot I'll show you. All the buttons were sewn on by machine. I'll show you the button sewing foot for that. Now think of buttonholes too. They're very functional, but also they could be decorative. So we can use various threads for that. And these buttonholes, for example, I stitched through. This sample has got batting in between. So imagine if this were my quilt, I could use buttonholes, non-functioning buttonholes that is, like don't slit these apart. But I can stitch my buttonhole as a means of tacking my 3 layers together. Instead of hand tying that quilt together, I could use a buttonhole. So how cool is that? A few years ago, I wrote a blog on Janome Life blog after I saw a quilt that the Janome Canada team had indeed done that with buttonholes. So you can go to Janome Life. It's Janome Life in your browser. It's janomelife.wordpress.com. And there's a search box off to the right. So you can type in buttonholes and all the posts related to buttonholes will come up. There's a follow button there. So you can click on that and you'll get an email notification of every new blog post. Lately, since COVID had started and we're all at home more, we've been doing a Janome Life blog post every day. So lots of information to share. So again, buttonholes, any of our machines will do so. Now today I'm using the fabulous Continental M7, so generally a little more sophisticated, but easily I can scroll through here using this little button to find my stitches, or I've got the buttonhole and button icon. So see if your machine has an icon that looks like that, which you can just hit and it'll take you directly to your buttonhole section. Now I can go up to this little piece of paper there and touch, and there's all my built-in buttonholes to the machine. Now maybe I've got a machine, I think it's the Skyline S7 is the first of our machines that has the sewing applications, is this little t-shirt here. So I click on that and it will, click on that, sewing applications, and it will take me directly to certain functions I can do. It's like the machine is asking me, what do you want to do? So I can scroll through and say, oh, here's my buttonhole. So automatically the machine is set up so I can sew my buttonholes very simply and easily. Now your machine manual will really be of value for you when you're going to do buttons and buttonholes, because again, it's not something we do every day necessarily. So on the Continental M7, for example, I've got 13 buttonholes from which to choose. It tells me all about it. And I have pages and pages and pages and pages all about how to do all these buttonholes. So I'm not going to go over all of that with you, but to just say, look in your instruction manual for more detail. If you can't find your manual, maybe it's been a few years, you can go online, go to janome.com or janome.ca, scroll down to the bottom where it says support, and you click on that, and then it'll take you to another page. It'll say manuals, and then you click on that, and there will be the manual for your machine, probably, or then there's a retired section. So even if your machine is no longer in production, you can find your manual that way. So a very good resource. And as you stitch out these buttonholes, it's really good to do little samples like this and label what you're doing. If you eventually, when we get the Janome Sewing and Learning Center up and running after the COVID is over, when we do our classes, we'll be doing a lot of reference samples like this. So you build a reference binder, because again, you're not always doing this every day. So it's nice to go back and say, oh, when did I do this? When did I use this thread and all that? So one of our buttonholes, for example, the memory buttonhole, I'm able to stitch the buttonhole any size, and then the memory of the machine records it and then asks me, do you want to do that again? So these 3 buttonholes, for example, are all the same size. So that's a very cool feature. Again, not all the machines have that, but if you're considering upgrading your machine and you do a lot of garment sewing, for example, maybe this is a feature you'd like to have. Again, there's that keyhole buttonhole I mentioned. Again, great for thicker fabrics to give you a little bit more space. There's that buttonhole stretch buttonhole that I mentioned earlier that I will talk about. When this is good to use for knits, because again, you still want to maintain that stretch of the knit. So by having that kind of open zigzag lets you do that. Your patterns will tell you to interface your facings here, your button stand. So for fusible, I like using this tricot interfacing because it's got the stretch. So it's built in. So that's very good to help support your buttonholes. But I've also used something additional. Now this buttonhole looks perfectly fine, but to me this one looks a little better. I see my threads a little bit more predominantly. Now that is because I've used a fusible interfacing over, or not fusible, sorry, I've used a water-soluble stabilizer over my buttonhole. So that I will show you in just a minute. It's very cool to help, again, support your buttonhole. So I can use a variety of different threads. Here is our iris polyester embroidery thread, but I like using it something a little more decorative, for example. Or I could also use a 12 weight. This is a thicker thread, 12 weight. So I'd get a more pronounced buttonhole. Now, if I'm using a thicker thread like this, maybe it won't be so good in the needle threader. So I may need to thread this by hand, which is no problem. But again, would give you a cool decorative look. Now, we could also use a nice thick, heavy floss like this, not in the needle, but I can lay it under my buttonhole, and then I could have a corded buttonhole. So again, if your machine is capable of doing this, it'll be mentioned in your manual, but it's very cool to do. Now, a lot of our machines come with the automatic buttonhole foot, and you drop your button here into the back and it will any size button, and then you just click that, click that closed, and then it will size this hole according to the size of your button. Very important when you're using the automatic buttonhole foot. And you see, I love the machines think for us, and it tells me to pull down the buttonhole lever. So this may be a little hard to see because of the camera angle, but the buttonhole lever will be behind your thread needle threader. If you have that on your machine, it'll generally be behind that, and it's up in the top here, usually just out of the way, but then you pull that down and there is your buttonhole lever. So what that does is it tells the automatic buttonhole foot, it'll hit these guides here. And it'll tell it when to stop, continue stitching across, and then on its way back down again to make that 4-step buttonhole, but it does it automatically. So it's very cool. The automatic buttonhole foot often comes with a stabilizer plate. Now, don't throw this away. A lady at one of my seminars said she didn't know what this was, so she threw it away. But this is a really good thing to use. It's got a little grippy surface on the back here. And you lay that down on the bed of your machine first. Then you lay your fabric on top of that. And then your automatic buttonhole foot goes over it. So then by having that stabilizer plate on the bed of your machine, it helps the fabric feed more evenly. It's stable. It's holding it in place regardless of which buttonhole you're using. So it's a really good thing to use. You'll notice on this buttonhole foot, so I've marked for, this is my center front of my shirt placket, let's say. This crosshairs will be the start of my button. So I line it up with the red crosshairs of this automatic buttonhole foot. So then I know exactly where my buttonhole is going to start. And I like drawing, especially if I haven't been doing buttonholes lately, I like to draw this little arrow. It'll come off my fabric, no problem. I could even do it on the other side instead, but it's just a reminder that my buttonhole foot is going to go backward. The foot and the fabric are actually going to come forward, but this little part are going to go backward as it stitches. So just to remind yourself, it's not going to go forward as if we're regularly stitching. So just a little reminder there. Now, again, I mentioned the corded buttonholes. You can use this thick floss, or even, how about embroidery floss, would be kind of cool. And there's these little grooves on the back of your automatic buttonhole foot. I bet you didn't even know that they were there. But if you look at your instruction manual or go to your Janome Life blog, you'll find more information of how to do these corded buttonholes, that they just loop around these guides in the back. The floss goes under your foot there and into the little guide at the front. And then whatever buttonhole you choose to do, you'll stitch directly over that cord. And then you would trim it flush, as I did on this sample here. Or maybe you want to just cut it short and use it as a fringe, as a decorative thing. Or you can thread your tapestry needle. I love using this in my sewing room. The tapestry needle's got a thick eye and a blunt point. And then I could thread with that really big eye, I could thread my floss through it and then stick my needle in between layers, and then that will finish off the edge of that floss neatly. If I do trim it off, it's not gonna, come off, but I like using a little bit of fray check on that as well. So there's gonna be no loose threads. So that's very simple and easy to do, a beautiful finish. Now, as maybe I want to do a bigger buttonhole because I'm doing a lot of tote bags, for example, and I want to use some really big buttons. So our automatic buttonhole foot that comes available with a lot of the machines, or it's also available in a separate blister pack, as is the stabilizer plate, either comes with or it's available separately as well. That these are for buttons up to 1 inch in diameter. So if I wanted a bigger one to use, like this bigger button's about 1.5 inches, I had in my stash this fabulous buttonhole maker. This is the LR, is the large buttonhole foot and stabilizer plate. Now it says at the top it's for 9mm machines, which I know I've got here with the Continental M7, but it says for Memorycraft 15,000 only. Now the M7 came out after the 15,000, so I wondered, I didn't see why this wouldn't work with my M7, so I did try it, and of course it worked out beautifully. Like it's the same foot, only bigger. So this is the R foot and this is the LR foot, and this will do buttonholes up to 2 inches in diameter. So again, great for your tote bags, and really thick, heavy wool coats, for example, would be great. So that'll accommodate that bigger button, no problem. On this little sample here, let's say you stitch out your buttonhole and this looks perfectly fine, but I want something, again, more decorative and something a little more substantial. So I just went over this buttonhole twice. You can easily do that, and that'll produce, again, a more decorative look. So that's an option there too. I will show you this sample. There's some cool adjustments you can make, again, depending on your machine, that I just found out you can make. They're very cool. So I'm using, this is the same length of buttonhole, but up here on my machine, you can see I've got some adjustments. So this one down here is for the width of the stitching on the outside around the buttonhole. So if I use my little stylus here, and I go, it was at a 5, but I'm going to go up to a 9 because I know I've got a 9mm wide machine. So here's the buttonhole standard, but down here, do you see I widened that stitch? So it's, again, more pronounced. It's a little more decorative. I can also adjust the length of that zigzag stitch. So here it's set to 0.45, but I can bring it down really small to a 0.2. So there is 0.2, very small. But this is the new adjustment that I learned. It's been in the 15,000 all this time that I've owned it, but I've never seen this adjustment before. I've never looked for it. So again, read your manual. I can adjust the width between that row of stitching. So here it's set to 0.8, but I can increase it all the way up to a 2, which is at this sample here. So this is great to increase the width here between your rows of stitching if you're going to use a really thick, heavy button, something dimensional like this one, really chunky. So isn't that cool that I can increase the width in between that line of stitching? So again, not every machine can do that, but see if yours will. It's very cool. So some other adjustments we could make. So let's say if you don't have this fancy computerized machine, or again, you want to use a buttonhole of a different size, or you're in a really tight area and you can't use this big automatic buttonhole foot. So we have an alternative. This is the B foot, since we're on the letter B today. So this is the B foot. It's the clear buttonhole foot. It comes in the separate blister pack. Now again, mine's 9mm for my 9mm machines. And that's the width of this opening here that will correspond with my needle plate. Now it looks very similar, you'll see, to this is our F foot, which is the satin stitch foot that comes with a lot of the machines. Again, and available in a separate blister pack. The F foot has this big groove in the bottom to allow for the decorative stitches to come through. The B foot has the same similar groove, but it's got this little divider in between. So as I do my buttonhole, the stitch will go up one side, up to that guide in the middle, and then the stitch will come down the other side, again, up to that guide in the middle. So it's very cool. Now you'll see this little hook on the back, and this allows you to also do your corded buttonholes. You just hook it around that little hook at the back. So again, corded buttonholes of any size as well on any machine. This clear buttonhole foot is available again for all our 9mm, 7mm, and 5mm machines. Now when you come to you're ready to sew your button on by machine, we have the button sewing foot, is the T foot. It comes available in some machines and as well also in a separate blister pack. And it will clip into the back. This particular T foot will clip into the back of my foot holder here, and then it'll pivot up to this one the way that our regular feet clip into. So it clips into the back and then clips up in the middle here. And then I would lay my fabric down. I'd have my button on top of it. And then I would have my button foot on top of that. Now, it's great if we have sewing applications. Then I just click on my little t-shirt and I say, oh, I'm going to sew on a button. So I click on that and automatically the machine is set up for me. My feed dogs have dropped. The width of my zigzag, because I'm just going to go back and forth in between those two little holes, the width of my zigzag is already pre-calculated, so that's great. Now, if I don't have sewing applications, though, I'm going to make a narrow zigzag, and I want to make sure the needle goes in between those holes. Now, I see my machine tells me it's 3.5 millimeters in between those holes. Now, you could take out a little measuring device to double check yourself. And I found out, just by comparison, regardless of the diameter of your button, the width of the holes is pretty much the same. So I think that's very cool to know going forward. Regardless of how big your button hole is or your button is, the distance in between those little holes is the same. So again, very handy when you're sewing it on by machine, and you always want to turn your flywheel doing those first couple of stitches to make sure your zigzag is going in those holes. You don't want to go too fast and potentially go too wide and break the needle. So always walk it by hand. Now, something to help you really see those tiny little holes, look, that just arrived. It is the Optic magnifier. There's 3 different lenses, 3 different degrees of magnification, 20, 40, and 60. Now, this one is specific for the Continental M7 that I just got it. Now, we've had the optic magnifiers. This one came with my 15,000, and this will fit many of our other machines, some of the QDCs, for example, that these have been available for a while. But why we needed one specifically for the M7, if as I hold them, together, do you see this post is much longer than this one here. So this is why these ones are still available. Maybe your machine will fit them. If you have a Continental M7, though, you'll need this one that is specific to the M7 because it is bigger. Now, if your machine will accept these, there'll be a little hole. It's generally around behind the needle threader. Behind the thread cutter. So I need to look under, get my head under the machine and see. So you need to tip your head back. Again, I can't, oh, there we go. So you need to tip your machine back, get your head under there. I know I wrote about this in a Janome Life blog post on how to attach these optical magnifiers, but they're really good to use to really get you down to what's happening in the needle. So double check again with your Janome Dealer to get that. Now, just before I wrap up, I want to mention stabilizers. I had alluded to it before. This water-soluble stabilizer, for example, that I used on my knit sample. I love this Madeira stabilizer pack available from your Janome Dealer. Janome Canada is a distributor of Madeira products, so maybe your Janome Dealer has this in stock or again can order for you. And the stabilizer pack has a lot of different stabilizers and a booklet that shows you how to use it all. And the water soluble that I really like is this Avalon film is slightly lighter, and this Avalon Ultra I really love because it's really heavy duty and thick, but you just peel it away afterward and spritz it with some water and it disappears. I also like this Cotton Stable is iron-on, so it's got the little iron icon there, but it's also a tearaway, so I can iron it on my fabric, hold it in place, do my buttonholes, and then I would put this on the back of the fabric, for example, and then I would just tear it off afterward. Or this is the Cotton Soft, so this has no fusible on it. So then I would do my buttonhole and then again tear this away. So that's very easy. Now, when in doubt, you can always use the good old standby coffee filters is what I used to use in the past, but it's really nice to have that Madeira stabilizer pack for a stabilizer, whatever I may need. So I think that was everything I needed to mention. There's so much, but again, consult your manual, consult your Janome Dealer, check us out on the Janome Life blog for more information about any of this. If you happen to tune in live late today, that this will be stored in the stories, Janome HQ stories for 24 hours, and then I'm going to upload it to the Janome HQ YouTube channel. So then you can tune in later to check it out. So today's letter is brought to you by the letter B. Janome HQ Instagram Live is brought to you by the letter B. So here is my little sample showing the buttonhole foot T and showing the button foot T and the buttonhole foot B. That's a lot of letters to remember. So I will see you all on Friday, 2 p.m. as we explore the letter C. So I will see you all then. Have a fabulous day. Thank you. Bye.